The first subheading here on my script says pro-smoking propaganda. Danielle Smith's CV reads like a political shapeshifter. School trustee, radio and print columnist, Wild Rose leader, media personality, registered lobbyist, and now the Premier of Alberta. And while that professional trajectory is fine in itself, a lot of politicians have had multiple careers, but the things that matter are the positions that she holds and when she holds them. She's been pro-gay in earlier political movements. She's wrote contrarian columns about smoking in the early 2000s. She's pitched industry-friendly ideas as a lobbyist and then campaigned in a way that appealed broadly to the UCP supporters. The point is not her personality, it is that her public pronouncements and policy priorities have repeatedly aligned with powerful interests, especially now in oil and education. Hello, you stunning woman on the go. My name is David Day, and welcome back to Dismantle.
Do you smell that? It's like something's burning.
Oh, it's the the contradiction.
Yes.
Welcome back to Dismantling Hate, the show with sharp analysis, unapologetic resistance, and just enough comedy to keep us from losing our minds. Today, we are digging, rifling, and roasting Danielle Smith, the only person who can support gay marriage, lobby for oil companies, and argue smoking is fine, and then pose as a champion of parents all before breakfast. We're just building the lore here. She's pro-gay, and then she's anti-trans. Smoking is good, and then I have no citations of her saying that smoking is bad. I imagine that she would now say smoking is bad. In this video, we are going to unpack the thrift store political wardrobe that Danielle Smith has been wearing for years. Spoiler alert, a lot of the outfits have oil stains. Let's get into it. Dismantling Hate starts now. So in this video, we're going to break it down into two different sections. The first section is going to be relevant past behavior as we are talking about the teacher strike and the state of public education in Alberta. And then chapter 2, we are specifically going to dig into Alberta's education crisis. Let me get one thing straight. I am not here to be petty. I'm here because policies affect children and public services. When a government slashes or neglects public systems while handing public money to private operators while simultaneously turning schools into battlegrounds of culture war, that's not abstract. That's classrooms without supplies, stretched teachers, kids without support, and political theater that uses families as props. In the last 3 years, this provincial government has rolled out a set of moves: licensing, funding changes, directives on school libraries, changes on how gender and sexuality are taught, and big incentives for private school construction, which together paint a picture, prioritize ideology and private options while public education strains. We're going to talk about the facts, we're going to talk about the timelines, the actors involved, and unfortunately, but most importantly, the consequences. But first, we're gonna have a laugh. We're gonna have a laugh. We need to have a laugh and really outline the hypocrisy of Danielle Smith's positions on various issues throughout her, in my opinion, embarrassing career. Pro-smoking propaganda. What a sentence. Before politics became boutique, Danielle Smith wrote columns that made people do double takes. Not opinions that you can easily recycle, actual contrarian stunts that later became political landmines, and thank God we found them. I want you to think about the following quote for a moment. Moderate cigarette consumption can reduce traditional risks of disease by 75%.
I'm not a scientist.
And this is a reported summary of a 2003 column attributed to Smith. Smith has worked as a Calgary Herald columnist and national media personality. In the early 2000s, she published provocative columns, including a 2003 piece taking aim at the anti-smoking lobby. I did not have to dig very far to find this. I heard about this on Reddit and found her original article in less than 30 seconds. So if you don't Believe me, please go look this up for yourself because it's out there. Imagine putting this on your resume under public health expertise. I have opinions about disease reduction via cigarettes. It's a great pivot move for a premier. Next up is her pro-gay past and her anti-trans present. So this is where the costume changes start to matter. Not that promoting smoking doesn't matter, but there's not even really a hint of humor in this part. In 2012, as Wild Rose leader, Danielle Smith declared herself pro-choice and pro-same-sex marriage. But as premier, her government moved to restrict trans youths' access to care and impose parental consent and pronoun rules in schools. This is not evolution, it's political repositioning with real harm attached. So in 2012, she said things like, quote, "When our members elected me, they knew they were electing a candidate that was pro-choice and pro-gay marriage." And then recently in 2024, she talks about how parents should be informed and involved in the decisions concerning their children. The 2012 quote is very specific, while the 2024 quote is very broad. And I really think that the widening of the gray area when it comes to policy is something that is reminiscent of fascism. I'm just going to say it.
And I'm at peace with that.
We've talked about this before many times on this channel, but just to reiterate, in early 2024, Smith announced a slate of policies targeting how schools handle students' names and pronouns, age limits and parental permission for gender-affirming care, and proposed restrictions on trans participation in female sports. And these measures were widely reported and criticized by queer organizations, medical groups, and many municipalities. This matters because these policies change how schools treat students on a regular basis, forcing schools to notify parents about the name and pronoun changes or requiring parental permission for social transition in kids under 16. This risks outing vulnerable students to unsupportive families and increases real harm. And a lot of critics say that these steps are punitive to trans youth and ignore clinical guidance. Ignoring clinical guidance. I'm gonna pin that. She also spearheaded or allowed the passage of the Education Amendment Act in 2024, which forces parents to opt in for sex education or material on gender identity and sexual orientation. Now, this is instead of an opt-out, and this is a really big shift in how these topics get taught. The next up, we can't ignore her ethics record. She was found by the Alberta Ethics Commissioner to have violated the Conflicts of Interest Act by intervening in discussions about criminal charges in a case, and allegations swirl around her involvement in the rapid hiring and firing inside Alberta Health Services. The last thing we're going to talk about here is the RStar giveaway, and this was really eye-opening to me. So the RStar program is basically a giveaway to oil companies that is disguised as incentives for cleanup and investment. In reality, it reduces the royalties these companies owe the province for the work that they're already legally required to do. So Alberta taxpayers end up footing part of the bill while private companies get rewarded for doing their job. This sounds very familiar to what is happening in education as we speak. This is sketchy because it's not about efficiency or the benefit of the general public. It's about funneling public money to well-connected industry players, all while classrooms stay underfunded and public services get squeezed for everything that they have. In short, we pay large oil companies to clean up their own mess. That's what this is for. The RStar program is funneling public money in order to clean up the mess that they created, of which they are already legally required to do with the contracts that they sign with the province. And as you probably know, Danielle Smith used to lobby for the oil industry, and now she's premier. So it's less of a revolving door and more about revolving ballroom, all with matching oil cufflinks. Yikes. So that's the end of chapter 1. So we have all of these different pieces trying to put together the context of where Danielle Smith is coming from and her political strategies to get what she has wanted so far in her political career. So now we're going to get into chapter 2 and we'll start to see the parallels of what is currently happening. In Alberta, the ongoing teacher bargaining process has been marked by significant delays and a general lack of urgency by the provincial government. The Teacher Employer Bargaining Association, otherwise known as TEBA, they have scheduled its next meeting with the Alberta Teachers Association, otherwise known as the ATA, for October 15th. 2025. This delay has left educators in a state of uncertainty, with many feeling that the government is intentionally withholding negotiations to pressure teachers into accepting unfavorable terms. The teacher strike commenced on October 4th, and the government's bargaining association was not available to sit down for mediation for over a week, almost a week and a half. What is the Teacher Employer Bargaining Association doing other than dealing with teacher employer bargaining? Shouldn't these people be on a stick doing everything they can to get teachers and students back in classrooms as soon as possible? It appears as if they might not be. The government's messaging has been particularly contentious. Statements suggest that the ATA needs to be clear on what teachers want. That is misleading and very dismissive. The ATA has consistently outlined its demands, including better pay, improved working conditions, and increased support for students. These requests, however, are not new. They have been communicated through various channels and are well documented. The insinuation that teachers are not clear about their needs undermines their professionalism and the legitimacy of their concerns. Somehow, the conditions of the student experience are part of this teacher strike. It's not just about teachers' working conditions. It's not just about a higher salary. They're putting their lives and their careers and their financial health on the line for things that don't directly have to do with them. I think that says something really important about the state that public schooling is in our province. Now we're going to talk about public versus private school funding, and I have a little comparative analysis to talk about here. Alberta's approach to funding education has raised significant concerns, particularly regarding the disparity between public and private school funding. Public schools in Alberta receive the lowest per student funding in Canada, a situation that has persisted for many years. In contrast, private schools receive approximately 70% of the per student funding allocated to public schools. And while this might look like a cost-saving measure, it is essential to consider the broader implications. Critics argue that funding private schools at this rate diverts essential resources from the public education system, exacerbating issues like overcrowded classrooms, understaffed schools, and limited access to educational resources. Moreover, private schools often charge tuition fees, creating a two-tiered education system that favors families with higher incomes. This system undermines the principle of equitable access to quality education for all students, regardless of their background. And this disparity in funding between private and public schools has profound societal implications. Education is a fundamental pillar of a democratic society, and ensuring that everybody has equal access to a quality education is crucial for inclusion and economic mobility. When public schools are underfunded, students from lower income families are disproportionately affected, limiting their opportunities and perpetuating cycles of poverty. I want you to think about the motivations that somebody might have in perpetuating cycles of poverty. Who would want that, and why would they want that? I'm not going to answer, but I want you to think. Furthermore, the existence of a parallel private education system can lead to societal fragmentation. Sorry, that was a lot of attitude. It can create divisions based upon income and access to resources, undermining the shared values and experiences that public education aims to foster. A well-funded public education system is essential for promoting social equity, civic engagement, and the overall well-being of society. At this point, I'm really noticing the through line that all of these talking points that I have here truly come down to the fact that I just believe that everybody should be able to be successful. Period. Full stop. Everybody should have access to a high quality education. Period. Full stop. I believe everybody should have equal access to quality healthcare. Period. Full stop. It's not that complicated, and it is doable. We see places throughout the world who are doing this, but for some reason, we are not doing this here. I wonder why. So when did this start? Private school funding did not start with Danielle Smith. So Alberta funds accredited private and independent schools at 70% of the per student operating funding that public or separate schools receive. That rate is amongst the highest in Canada, and this funding model has gone through a long evolution. Private school funding started small, but over decades, successive provincial governments expanded it. In 1967, Alberta began providing public funding starting at a token of $100 per student per year. In the 1970s, it rose to about 33 to 40%, and under Premier Ed Stelmach's government in 2008, Alberta raised the funding rate to 70%. Okay, I have an aside here. Ed Stelmach was a progressive conservative premier, and I want to read you an excerpt from the alberta.ca website describing him. An accident on the first day of grade 1 resulted in Ed badly breaking his leg, an injury that required hospitalization. The care he received at Sister Servants of Mary Immaculate Hospital in Mundare, where the world's largest sausage is, contributed significantly to his appreciation for faith-based community healthcare.
Oh, Jesus. Gross.
That's an oxymoron. Faith-based healthcare? No, faith-based healthcare is not a thing. Also, apparently, sorry, this is still an aside. Also, apparently he spent a considerable amount of time in Vegreville, which I don't know if you know, is in Alberta. And assumedly he was there a lot because of the concentration of Ukrainian immigrants that settled and designed the world's largest Easter egg. And this was the part of my research where, I'm like dead-eyed, slack-jawed, hunched over my laptop, and I knew it was time to cut, print, and move on. Anytime there's a connection to my DSM travel channel, I know it's time to go touch grass because the world has become too small. Anyway, back to the funding of private schools in Alberta. What is my life? Jesus. Okay, Alberta is an outlier, and many provinces either fund private schools at much lower rates or not at all. For example, Ontario, New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, Newfoundland and Labrador, Prince Edward Island do not fund private schools at all. Zero. British Columbia provides private funding, but at lower percentages, and it is on a sliding scale, so many elite private schools get less public subsidies. Saskatchewan and Manitoba fund at about 50%, and Quebec funds at 60%. So Alberta's 70% really stands out, and this system is not natural or inevitable. It's a political choice that was built over decades and is increasingly criticized as a subsidy to elite operators rather than equitable support. There's a few main red flags that we need to talk about here. So private schools in Alberta are not required to publicly disclose their audited financial statements in the same way that public schools do, even though they receive substantial public funds. This makes it hard for citizens to see exactly how taxpayer money is spent. So the argument that people make that it is going to be saving tax dollars by spending only 70% per student, I do imagine a lot of that chunk of money of the 70% is not spent on those private school students at all, because most likely these private schools either have a very large sunshine fund, which is just a huge account of money that they have that this public subsidy just keeps growing and banking into, and or the tuition that parents most likely have to pay for their students to attend these schools. So yes, if you look at it at a very topical level, yes, you may be saving money, but that money might not have to be outlaid at all for the success of those students in that school. The problem is not private schools. The problem is the funding going places that might not necessarily need it. So I'm a big fan of the way that British Columbia has structured their private school funding model. It's a case-by-case basis, and that's really what it should be, in my opinion at least. An economist for the Alberta Teachers Association named Neil Hepburn used CRA charity filings for private schools and found that many private schools spend more than twice per student than nearby public schools. In 15 private schools that Neil analyzed, per student expenditure ranged from $23,000 to $39,000 per student per year, while in comparison, public schools spent about $1,100 to $11,500 per student per year. This means that private schools receiving public funds are often operating with a much higher per student cost, potentially providing premium services, facilities, or administration, which is great, but not while public schools struggle with their constrained budgets. It's not let's take everything away from them and give it to them. It's let's balance the playing field here a little bit, especially if things smell of corruption. Allegedly, in my opinion, for legal reasons. So like I said before, many private schools charge very high tuition while also collecting the 70% public subsidy. So parents paying high tuition get the benefit of public subsidy on top of what they're already paying. And a lot of critics call this a public subsidy for elites. So next up, we need to talk about selection and exclusion. Private schools can, and often do, pick their students, reject applications, or charge additional fees. Public schools, however, legally must accept all students in their jurisdiction. This means the subsidy that supports an institution can exclude lower income, special needs, or disadvantaged children. Because private schools do not have the same accountability to the public, there's no elected school boards, there's fewer transparency obligations, there's a lot less democratic oversight over their decision making. There were a handful of folks in my comment section that shared their experiences as neurodivergent students who were funneled into private schools because the public system did not have the resources to support them. That's why it is important to explicitly state the problem, again, is not private schools. The problem is not funding the private schools either. It's about the amount of funding and how that funding is acquired. Is it applied for? Is it relied on? I think the best option is like the BC model, where funding for private schools fluctuates depending on their mandate. Critics argue that when public funds flow into exclusive high-fee private schools that entrench inequality, well-off families get both subsidy and premium services, while disadvantaged populations are left with under-resourced public schools. I know it might feel like I'm saying the same thing over and over, because I am. But I haven't said this yet. An example of this is Arches in Lethbridge. This was a private school that had its funding revoked after an audit found a misappropriation of funds, governance problems, and expenditures exceeding permissible limits. So the school had been receiving 70% funding, and the audit revealed that 1.6 million could not be accounted for. And $342,943 was spent on senior executive compensation when the grant only allowed for $80,000. This is a concrete case where a private institution receiving public money was found to misuse it, reinforcing concerns that the oversight is way too weak. A decent amount of people in my comment section asked me to talk about the connections that Danielle Smith has to some of these private school leaders, and I did not find a clean, verified case showing that Premier Smith personally directed private school funding in return for bribes or a court ruling of corruption in the exact scheme. But what I did find are credible structural issues, misuse cases like Arches, and patterns that raise strong concerns about accountability, influence, and inequity. One interesting note, social media and public discussion allege ties between private schools and UCP-aligned people. For example, a lot of people claim that Weber Academy, which is a high-fee private school here in Calgary, had connections to the UCP. Weber charges about $15,000 baseline fees, so if you have some verifiable information on that topic, you can email me or send me a DM on Instagram, both of which are linked in the description. So where do we go from here? I'll tell you exactly. There is a movement to end private school funding in Alberta. So a petition proposal led by a teacher named Alicia Taylor has been approved by Alberta's Chief Electoral Officer. The proposed referendum question is, should the government of Alberta end its current practice of allocating public funds to accredited independent private schools? To force the question on the ballot, the petition requires 177,000 signatures in 120 days. If successful, the result could compel the government to redirect private school subsidies towards public education. In response to that, the government claims that cutting private school funding would create massive pressure on the public system because private school students need alternate placement, and they warn of a logistical stress. I'll leave you to develop your sense of irony. Teachers, public education advocates, and labor groups have expressed support for ending or at least reforming private school funding, and the Alberta Federation of Labor issued a statement. It's time for Albertans to demand the end to public funding of private schools. Public financial support for private schools undermines equitable education for all. Independent education groups expressed disappointment that the petition could potentially threaten some private institutions, likely because a lot of these private schools rely on stable public subsidies to balance their enormous budgets. And a little bit of media coverage frames this as potentially transformative. If this petition succeeds, subsidies for independent schools could be pulled, forcing many of them to raise tuition or close, and these students would fall back into the public system, putting strain on already underfunded public schools. But if a lot of elites, for lack of a better term, have their students in the public system and they see the state of the public system, unfortunately money talks. So it might be a good thing for the future of public education in our province to have everybody in public schools. Not everybody, but more. There's a middle ground here. There's a middle ground. Okay, here's your call to action. Here are the things we can do. Number one, read the reporting linked below. I have so many links for you to take a look at from all the information that I've gathered here today. Go down there and look into things. Number two, and while you can't do this right now while labor action is taking place, you can probably do it once we get back to the normal school year, is attend the school board meetings. You don't even have to be on the board. Just go and understand how this ground level implementation of these policies work. Ask what is being funded and how decisions are being made. Number three, support local journalism. Hi, it's me, David Day. Subscribe to this channel. There are a lot of people around us who are reporting on these things. Follow them, support them in whatever ways that you can. Number four, organize. If you care about public funding for public schools, join the teachers' rallies and sign these petitions. Yes, politics changes in elections, but also with community pressure, and we can see that a little bit already. And number five, if you've got evidence of wrongdoing, physical documents, credible reporting, send it to me. I'll verify it and then I will read it out loud on camera. In conclusion, Danielle Smith is politically chameleonistic, deeply industry friendly, and currently running an education agenda many experts say will harm kids. This is the kind of corruption that is baked into policy and campaign cash. She is a premier whose policies and choices have consistently favored private interests, industry giveaways, culture war priorities over public system supports. The evidence? The RStar reporting, private and charter school funding moves, the book removal fiasco, the labor conflict with teachers, and the ethics investigation. All of this points to a coherent pattern of choices that benefit certain constituents at the public expense. If you don't like the direction our premier is taking in schools, healthcare, and taxpayer money, don't scream at strangers on social media, even though that's what I'm doing right now. Sorry. Bring your pitchforks to the ballot box instead. Read the reporting, support local journalism, organize, show up at school board meetings, ask your MLA how their vote aligns with the safety of kids. Don't accept slogans when policies have real consequences. That's how we win arguments and elections. Take a big deep breath. We're at the end. There's things you can do. You're gonna be okay. Our kids are gonna be okay. We're all gonna be okay, but not without effort. So take a moment, take a drink, take a snack, do whatever you need, and then let's get down to it, because we can change this. And we will. I do have a lot of confidence, in fact, that we can, because it's already happening. Go sign the petition. And I think I'm gonna leave it on the note of, a lot of people say the more you learn, the dumber you feel. And after going through all the research for this video, not to brag, but I feel like a dumb bitch. So stupid. Yeah, not to brag, but I'm a dumb... No, you incessant rhymes with witch? Holy... Okay. Now I need to go film something fun, because that's depressing.